We have a problem, Batman. Gotham needs you again.
Vecna is trauma-given godlike power, a being who has transcended human limitations through centuries of accumulating pain, suffering, and forbidden knowledge. He exists partially outside normal reality, capable of reaching into minds across dimensions to torment victims with their worst memories and deepest fears. The contingency protocol must account for an enemy who doesn't simply kill, but rather feeds on psychological anguish, transforming personal trauma into supernatural strength, while using guilt and shame as weapons more potent than any blade. His greatest advantage isn't his magical abilities, but his intimate understanding of human weakness, gained through eons of studying how people break under pressure. The plan must address a threat that attacks the mind first and the body second, turning victims into willing participants in their own destruction through careful manipulation of their emotional vulnerabilities. Reality manipulation allows him to alter the fundamental laws of physics within his sphere of influence, creating pocket dimensions where he controls every variable and making traditional tactical planning ineffective. His powers include telekinesis that can crush objects or people from vast distances, temporal manipulation that can slow or accelerate time around specific targets, and dimensional rifts that allow him to appear anywhere without warning. The Upside Down serves as both his base of operations and his primary weapon, a twisted mirror of our reality, where he can drag victims to fight on his terms rather than theirs. His connection to this alternate dimension means that conventional weapons and tactics may simply phase through him or be redirected through space that doesn't follow normal rules. The strategy requires understanding that fighting Vecna means fighting someone who can rewrite the battlefield itself, making preparation and environmental control nearly impossible through traditional means. Psychological targeting reveals his preference for victims who carry deep trauma and unresolved guilt, suggesting that he requires specific emotional conditions to establish his connection and exert his influence. His victims aren't chosen randomly but selected based on their psychological vulnerability to his particular brand of torment. He feeds on suffering that victims generate themselves through reliving past traumas, making his power dependent on finding people who already carry the emotional wounds he needs to exploit. The approach involves understanding his victim selection criteria and either protecting vulnerable individuals or using that knowledge to set traps with prepared subjects who can resist his influence. When his food source is removed or contaminated, his power weakens and his attention becomes divided between hunting for new victims and maintaining control over existing ones. What do you think, Alfred?
Master Bruce, Vecna represents something profoundly disturbing. The idea that our traumas and guilts can literally be weaponized against us by forces beyond our understanding. His power grows from the very human experiences that shape our character: loss, regret, failure, and pain. What makes him particularly dangerous is that he doesn't create these wounds, but rather exploits the ones we already carry. Perhaps the most important defense isn't tactical, but psychological, helping people process their traumas healthily so they can't be used as entry points for his influence. Sometimes the best armor against supernatural evil is a mind at peace with itself.
Alfred's point about trauma processing is idealistic, but impractical when dealing with an immediate supernatural threat. You can't therapy your way out of a psychic attack, and Vecna isn't going to wait for his victims to work through their issues in counseling. The focus has to be on immediate countermeasures, technological interference with his psychic abilities, pharmaceutical interventions that can block his mental intrusions, and protective equipment that can shield minds from supernatural influence. When someone can reach into your head from another dimension, the solution isn't better mental health, but better mental defenses. Sometimes surviving evil requires accepting that healing comes after victory, not before. What do you think, Robin?
He picks on people who are already hurting and makes them hurt worse, then get stronger from watching them suffer. It's like he figured out that the best way to destroy someone isn't to hit them physically, but to convince them they deserve to be destroyed. The creepy part isn't his magic tricks, it's how good he is at finding exactly the right thing to say to make someone give up on themselves completely.
Robin's insight reveals that Vecna's true weapon isn't supernatural power, but psychological expertise. He's essentially a master manipulator who uses magic to amplify basic bullying tactics. This understanding shifts the defensive strategy from trying to block magical attacks to protecting people from sophisticated psychological manipulation that happens to be delivered through supernatural means. The approach involves training potential targets to recognize manipulation attempts, developing mental resistance techniques that work regardless of the delivery method, and creating support systems that can counter his isolation tactics. When his victims understand they're being manipulated rather than judged, his emotional leverage disappears and his supernatural power becomes much less effective against prepared minds. Technological countermeasures focus on disrupting his connection between dimensions and interfering with the psychic energy he uses to maintain his influence over victims. His powers appear to operate through specific electromagnetic frequencies that can be detected and potentially jammed through proper equipment. The dimensional rifts he creates produce measurable distortions in local space, time that can serve as early warning systems for his presence. The strategy involves developing sensors that can detect his dimensional intrusions, creating interference devices that can disrupt his psychic transmissions, and building shielded areas where his influence cannot penetrate. This includes electromagnetic field generators, sonic disruptors tuned to psychic frequencies, and materials that can block dimensional energy. When his supernatural abilities can be reduced to measurable phenomena, they become problems that can be solved through engineering rather than magic. Music and emotional anchors provide the most effective known defense against his mental intrusions, as strong positive memories and emotional connections can overpower his ability to trap victims in negative thought loops. His victims escape his influence when they can focus on genuine love and connection rather than guilt and trauma, suggesting that his power is fundamentally parasitic and can't survive in the presence of authentic positive emotion. The strategy involves identifying each potential victim's strongest emotional anchors and creating systems that can remind them of these connections when under attack. This includes personalized music playlists, photographs of loved ones, recorded messages from family and friends, and any other sensory triggers that can invoke powerful positive memories. When his victims remember what they're fighting for rather than what they're running from, his psychological control breaks down completely. Environmental warfare exploits his dependence on specific atmospheric conditions and dimensional stability to maintain his influence in our reality. His manifestations appear to require certain environmental factors, electrical storms, high stress levels in the local population, and locations where the boundary between dimensions is already weakened. The strategy involves monitoring and controlling these environmental conditions to limit his ability to establish a foothold in our reality. This includes weather modification technology that can disperse the electrical activity he uses to power his manifestations, population management that reduces the collective stress levels he feeds on, and dimensional stabilization equipment that can reinforce the barriers between realities. When the environment doesn't support his presence, his power is significantly reduced, and his ability to maintain sustained attacks becomes limited.